The diner was nearly empty, the kind of quiet place where the hum of a refrigerator and the soft clink of cutlery felt louder than conversation. He chose a booth by the window, more out of habit than preference, and set his jacket beside him like it was an unspoken signal that the seat was taken, even though no one was coming. The waitress gave him a polite smile as she poured coffee, the kind that didn't ask questions. He nodded in return, staring down at the menu he already knew by heart. It had been a long day, and all he wanted was a simple meal, a little silence, and the comfort of not having to explain himself to anyone. He ordered quickly, his voice low, and leaned back, watching the faint glow of streetlights flicker outside. That's when the door chimed. He didn't look up at first. People came and went all the time, but the pause that followed, the kind of hesitation that lingers in the air, made him glance toward the entrance. A woman stood there, her coat slightly too thin for the weather, her hair pulled back in a way that suggested more urgency than care. Beside her was a small boy, maybe 6 or 7, clutching her hand and looking around with wide, uncertain eyes. They didn't move right away, as if deciding whether they belonged in a place like this. The waitress approached them, speaking softly, but the woman's gaze drifted across the diner until it landed on him. There was something in her expression, not quite desperation, but close enough to make his chest tighten. She walked over slowly, guiding the boy with her. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice gentle but strained. "I know this might be a strange request, but my son's hungry. Would you mind if we stayed here for a while?" The words weren't rehearsed. They felt real, fragile, like they might break if handled the wrong way. The boy didn't speak, just looked at the man with quiet hope, his small fingers gripping his mother's sleeve. For a moment he said nothing. This was exactly what he hadn't wanted, an interruption, a complication, a story that wasn't his. But as he looked at them, really looked, the silence he had been protecting suddenly felt heavier than it had before. He glanced at the empty seat across from him, then back at the boy's face. "You don't have to ask," he said finally, his voice softer now. "Sit down." The woman hesitated, as if she hadn't expected kindness to come so easily, then nodded with a quiet, "Thank you." As they settled into the booth, the space no longer felt empty, and somehow, neither did he. The waitress returned just as the woman and her son settled into the booth, her polite smile briefly flickering into surprise before she masked it with professionalism. The man cleared his throat and gestured toward them. "Whatever they want, put it on my bill," he said simply. The woman immediately shook her head, her hands lifting in quiet protest. "No, please. We didn't mean—" she began, her voice tight with pride and hesitation. But the man gently interrupted, not unkindly. "It's just food," he said. "Let him eat." The boy's eyes lit up in a way that was impossible to ignore, though he still glanced at his mother as if asking permission. After a brief pause, she gave a small nod, and the tension in his shoulders melted. He picked up the menu with both hands, studying it carefully, as though the choice mattered more than anything. When the waitress took their order, a simple meal, nothing extravagant, the boy spoke so softly it was almost a whisper. But his excitement filled the space anyway. As the waitress walked away, an unfamiliar silence settled over the table. It wasn't the comfortable quiet the man had wanted earlier. This one carried weight. The woman folded her hands together, her gaze dropping to the table. "Thank you," she said again, more firmly this time, though her voice still carried something fragile beneath it. "I'll find a way to repay you." "You don't have to," he replied, leaning back slightly. "Really?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, almost as if the words had been waiting too long, she exhaled softly. "It's just been hard lately," she admitted. "I had a job, but things changed. Rent, bills, you know how it is." She gave a faint, apologetic smile, as if explaining her situation to a stranger required justification. "I try not to ask for help, especially in front of him." The man nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of his cup. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know more than I'd like to." When the food arrived, the boy's focus shifted instantly. He sat up straighter, eyes wide, as the plate was placed in front of him. For a second, he just looked at it, almost in disbelief before carefully picking up his fork. He didn't rush. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, as if afraid it might disappear. The man watched silently, something in his chest tightening in a way he hadn't expected. The loneliness he had carried into the diner began to feel different, now less like emptiness, and more like something that could be shared, even if only for a moment. By the time the boy finished eating, the diner felt different, warmer, quieter in a way that no longer felt empty. The plate in front of him was nearly spotless, and he leaned back with a small, satisfied sigh, the kind only a child could make without thinking. His mother watched him closely, a soft smile breaking through, the worry that had been sitting on her face all evening. For a moment, she looked lighter, as if the simple act of seeing her son full had lifted something heavy off her shoulders. "Thank you," she said again to the man, this time with more steadiness in her voice. It wasn't just polite anymore, it was sincere, grounded. "You didn't have to do this." He shrugged slightly, though his expression had softened. "Maybe I did," he replied. "Just didn't know it until now." She studied him for a second, as if trying to understand what he meant but didn't press. Some things didn't need explaining. Instead, she reached into her worn bag and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I don't have much," she said, placing it gently on the table, "but this is my number. When I get back on my feet, I'd like to pay you back." He glanced at the paper but didn't pick it up right away. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "Maybe not," she replied, meeting his eyes, "but I'd like to anyway." There was a pause, not uncomfortable but thoughtful. Then he nodded once and slipped the paper into his jacket pocket, not as a transaction, but as a connection he hadn't expected to make. The boy, now full and a little more confident, looked up at him. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice small but clear. "That was the best meal I've had in a long time." The man smiled, genuinely this time. "I'm glad you liked it." As they stood to leave, the woman adjusted her coat and gently took her son's hand. Before turning away, she gave the man one last look, one filled with quiet gratitude and something else. Hope, maybe. Then they walked toward the door, the bell chiming softly as they stepped back out into the night. The man remained in his seat for a while after they left, staring at the empty space across from him. It wasn't the same emptiness as before. The silence no longer pressed against him. Instead, it felt calm, almost meaningful. He reached for his coffee, now lukewarm, and took a slow sip. He had come in expecting nothing more than a quiet meal alone. But as he sat there, he realized something had shifted. Sometimes, the smallest interruptions carried the greatest meaning, and sometimes, sharing a table with strangers could remind you that you weren't as alone as you thought.